A loner cowboy saved a dying native girl, but how she healed him shocked everyone. Before she had a name again, she had frost in her lungs and a brand on her wrist that said property. Before he ever spoke to her, he had once pulled a trigger against her kind, and before either of them believed in mercy, the snow had already decided it would remember everything they were trying to bury. She rose from the river with nothing but ice and silence clinging to her skin. He pulled her out without asking why. No words, no trust. Just two strangers scarred by history, trapped in the same winter. And from that moment on, every fire they lit, every step through the snow, every look across the silence was a choice not to run, but to stay, even when the world came to collect what it thought still belonged to it, even when the law brought rope and the past brought fire. This is the story of what happens when the river gives someone back, and a cowboy chooses not to let go. The river doesn't forget. The wind that day didn't just bite, it hollowed, pulled the breath from Jed Whitlo's lungs as he rode the ridge above Bitterroot Creek. His mare moved slow, hooves crunching through crusted snow. The world so still, it felt like the trees were holding their breath. Jed was 47, broad in the shoulders, worn down through the eyes. A former cavalry scout, a man with more ghosts than friends. He'd lived alone now for nearly a decade, tucked into a hand-built cabin. 2 days' ride from the nearest town. Didn't much matter what brought him out there, just that he stayed. He carried Mary's old Bible, didn't open it much, mostly used it to press flowers from a time he couldn't name anymore. Then came that morning, the one that didn't feel like a story, yet just cold. Down by the creek, something moved beneath the ice. Not fast, not loud, just a hand pail, trembling, reaching like it had changed its mind too late. Jed didn't shout, didn't think. He dropped the reins, skidded down the bank on both knees, belly against the frozen ground. The ice cracked under him, once, twice, and then his fingers brushed hers. She came up too light, too still, like she'd already let go. He threw her over his shoulder and carried her back through the snow, never saying a word. The horse, Flint, didn't spook, just followed, back at the cabin. He laid her on the bed, didn't strip her, didn't touch bare skin. He wrapped her in dry wool, set heated stones under her arms and feet, started the fire, sat in the corner, and waited. She was young, no more than 19, long black hair stiff with mud, lips cracked open from the cold. On her wrist beneath a torn blouse sleeve were letters inked into the skin. Property. Jed didn't ask who did it. Didn't need to. He just read aloud, voice thin from disuse. He shall not leave you in the deep, nor forsake you when the floodwaters rise. Outside, hoof prints began forming near the tree line. Fresh, steel-shod, not his. He didn't reach for the rifle. He just waited because the snow didn't lie. And when she woke, knife clutched to her own throat, panic thick in her lungs. Jed didn't stop her. He didn't speak, didn't approach. He just turned, opened the door, and stepped out into the cold, leaving her to decide if the fire meant danger or survival. Would she run? Would she trust the silence? Would she dare to stay? Part 1. Beneath the ice. She woke like someone pulled from a frozen river, not with a scream, not even a gasp, just breath tight, raw, burning like frost from the inside out. Her eyes opened slowly, disbelieving what they saw. Timber walls, a low-burning stove, one chair, one bed, and a folded quilt that smelled like pine smoke and loneliness. She didn't know the man's name, didn't ask, didn't need to. There was no voice in that cabin, only the soft hiss of snow melting off boots near the fire, and a silence so gentle it felt dangerous. Her body ached deep, like bruises left behind by something that didn't just want to hurt, but to own. She moved slowly, every motion a quiet test of what was still hers. Her fingers found the edge of the table first, then the knife. Small, dull, but sharp enough. If you meant it. She didn't blink, just raised it, pressed it to her own throat, with a hand too steady for someone still hoping. Across the room, he stood, tall, weathered, wearing stillness like it was stitched into his coat. But he didn't rush, didn't speak, didn't try to save her. Instead, he turned, walked to the door, and stepped out, left it open behind him, like the choice was hers to make, all of it. For a long, still moment, she just stood there, knife trembling, hand shaking, and the wind curling through the doorway like it was whispering, "You can go or you can stay." Then the blade slipped, fell to the floor, not with a crash, but a soft sound, too gentle for what it meant. And she followed. Not him, not yet. Just the breath of air, the promise of space, the first feeling in days that didn't sting. Outside, the man leaned against a fence post, looking to the horizon like he wasn't waiting and wouldn't chase her, even if she ran. She looked at him, then past him. Snow, trees, the ridge, freedom. But she didn't run. Not that night. She went back inside, lay down in the bed she didn't trust, under the quilt that still remembered someone else's weight. Her fingers curled around the tattoo on her wrist, the one they gave her, the one that lied. Property, as if a soul could ever belong to anyone. The fire cracked once. She didn't flinch. Somewhere in her mind, the river still pulled her under, and for now, she let it. By the hearth, he sat in silence, didn't smoke, didn't pray, didn't reach for her, just watched the logs fall apart, ember by ember, and checked quietly, gently, that she was still breathing. He didn't try to fix her, didn't pretend to understand. He just stayed. And outside the cabin, the snow kept falling, covering old footprints, erasing paths, but new ones were coming, sharp-edged, heavy, made by men who didn't knock when they came looking. The cold pressed against the windows like a breath held too long. But Jed didn't look up. He already knew some storms don't come with thunder. They come quiet, and they come walking. Part 2. The weight of her name. The snow didn't fall that morning. It waited, hung heavy in the sky like breath held too long, like even the clouds knew something sacred was shifting and didn't want to interrupt. Inside the cabin, silence had settled, not cold, not cruel, just quiet. Nally had swept the floor without a word, folded the quilt without being asked, and Jed had left the full pot of coffee on the stove. Though she hadn't touched a cup since she arrived, something between them had changed. Not broken, not spoken, just changed. But the world outside hadn't agreed to peace. Jed felt it first, not with his ears, not with his eyes. In the center of his chest, that old ache he'd long since learned to trust better than the sky. He stepped outside. The tracks were back. 3 sets this time. One dragged slightly. One barely pressed the snow. And the last, deep, slow, like boots too heavy with guilt. He didn't follow. Not yet. He knew the kind of men who left tracks like that. He'd ridden beside them once, followed orders, without question, back inside. She stood still, near the stove, hands trembling, just enough to betray her. She didn't ask, and he didn't offer lies. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a folded paper, sealed in thick red wax, the kind that smelled of ink, and power, and finality. He handed it to her. She read only 3 lines before her knees buckled. Wanted. Shoshone woman. Escaped property. Reward guaranteed. Return alive or dead. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She sat down slow. Jed stoked the fire like nothing had changed, even though everything had. By dusk, the knock came, not really a knock, a thud, low, deliberate. Jed opened the door. A burlap sack sat alone on the porch, tied tight with a leather cord. Inside, a photograph. Her, wearing a dress that didn't fit, standing beside a man whose hands gripped too tight, and behind it, another document. Same red seal, different message. Civil order of recovery. Failure to comply. Interference with federal claim. In the corner of the room, she stood like a statue, arms crossed over her ribs, eyes fixed to the floor. "I didn't kill him," she said softly. Then, quieter still, "I wanted to, but I didn't." Jed didn't answer. He fed the fire, watched the edges of the photograph curl and blacken in the flames. And then he knelt, just long enough for her to understand. He wasn't leaving, not tonight, but the world wasn't offering second chances. By morning, they came. 3 men on horseback, snow shaken from coats, rifles slung too casual. Jed stepped down from the porch, calm, hands where they could see. "You're harboring a fugitive." Marshal Dorn called. "I've got orders." Jed didn't look at the paper. He looked the man in the eye. "You don't know who she is." Dorn shook his head. "Don't matter. Law's the law." Jed didn't argue, didn't run. He stood there until they cuffed him, until she appeared in the doorway, until they took her. Too. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, just walked between them like someone who'd run out of fight a long time ago. That night, the fire crackled beneath the stars. Jed sat tied to a stump. She curled across from him, knees tucked tight to her chest. Neither spoke until she reached into her coat and pulled something sharp. A stone, rough-edged, familiar, the one from the river, the one she'd once held against her own skin before the current could take her. She raised it, not wild, not reckless, just tired. Jed moved, but Caleb Marshall's son moved faster. He grabbed her wrist. The stone fell into the snow. She froze, and Caleb didn't let go, didn't speak, just looked at her like he'd read something in her face that the paper had never said. Jed's voice cracked the silence, dry as old timber. "You still think she's the one who needs arresting?" Marshal Dorn stepped forward, gun already drawn. "One more word," he warned, "and I'll put you down." Jed didn't blink. "If putting chains on her makes this land yours, then you've never stood on ground. You didn't steal." The world went quiet. Caleb's hand dropped to his holster, not to draw, just to decide. "I didn't sign up to chase women for bounty," he muttered. No one spoke after that. And when the fire burned low, when the cold crept in, and her breath came light and shallow beside the flame, it wasn't rope that held them together. It was something else, choice, and it was burning. Slow. Part 3. When the fire comes. The thaw didn't come with sunlight. It came with smoke. Jed smelled it first sharp, sweet, wrong. A fire too fresh to belong to any hearth. By the time the second column curled up beyond the ridge, he was already moving. Behind him, children's voices broke in panic. Women gathered what they could: blankets, water skins, small hands. Men shouted in Shoshone, urgent and low, but language couldn't outrun what had already begun. Rufus Cade didn't give a warning, didn't slow down, didn't ask. He rode in hard, flanked by 2 hired guns who didn't need to know why, only who was paying. The first shot tore through the council lodge. The second shattered the woodpile beside the smokehouse. Jed dropped behind the well, shoulder slamming cold stone. A clay jar exploded inches from his head. Splinters and dust. He didn't blink. Pain had lived in his bones too long to startle him now. Near the elk traps, one of Cade's men raised a rifle. Eyes wild, Jed fired. 1 shot. Not clean, but enough. The man dropped. Flames licked along the shed rafters, slow and patient, like they already knew every door, every desperate exit. And Nally, she was already moving. No cries, no panic, just purpose. She pushed the children toward the east ravine. dragged a wet hide across them, let the snow cloak them like the mountain was on their side. Her hands bled where the stone brush tore her skin, but she didn't stop. Her body remembered what survival had taught her, before words ever could. Jed spotted the second gunman, torch in hand, orange fire blooming in the dark like a second sun. Jed ran, didn't shout, didn't hesitate. He hit the boy full force. Both men crashed to frozen earth. Jed's shoulder cracked against a wagon axle. The boy was quicker, younger, but Jed was mean. Mean like rust in a wound. Mean like sorrow that had nowhere else to go. He slammed his elbow into the boy's throat, tore the torch away, snuffed it with the heel of his boot. And then the shot, not from the men in front of him, from behind. Rufus Cade, pistol raised. Jed turned too slow. He saw it coming. He knew the shape of endings, but the bullet never came. Another shot rang out, crisp. Clean! Rufus twisted. Blood burst from his ribs. He staggered, looked up, wild-eyed. Another shot hit his shoulder. He dropped, hard, into the snow. Jed turned, and there, Caleb Dorn, standing alone on the ridge. Coat torn, hat gone, rifle still raised, eyes steady. He stepped forward. Rufus gasped, mouth full of gravel. "You side with savages now," he rasped. Caleb's voice was quiet, unshaken. "I side with people." The final shot ended the question. Then, silence, the kind that settles deep. The kind that tells you the fire is done, but the damage has only begun to show its shape. Smoke curled upward like memory. Ash drifted like snowfall. Nally stepped out from the trees, face streaked with soot, dress torn, shoulders heavy. Jed met her at the edge of the clearing. No words, no touch, just the weight of what survived. And the knowing that not everything had behind them. The village stirred. People counted names like prayers, held each other, the way grief holds still. A small girl tugged on Nally's sleeve. She knelt, held the child close, didn't speak. And up on the ridge, Caleb Dorn stood a moment longer. He didn't wait for thanks, didn't wait at all. He just turned and walked back into the snow. No badge, no orders, no more pretending he didn't know what justice looked like. Part 4. What remains after fire? The fire had died, not just the one that swallowed the lodge. That one was ash now, drifting skyward like stories nobody wanted to tell again. But something deeper had burned down too. The fear, the pretending, the part of her that still flinched when a hand moved too fast. In the days that followed, the village healed, slowly, quietly. No celebration, no sermons, just women stitching canvas with fingers that remembered how. Men setting logs where walls had fallen, not to ask who broke them, only to rebuild. And the children, they chased smoke like it was just mist now, not memory. Jed helped. He didn't wait to be asked, didn't expect to be thanked. He hauled buckets from the creek, carried firewood to the elder's tent, sat still while old voices spoke in a tongue he didn't know, but honored anyway. He still slept outside, not because he wasn't welcome, but because some parts of a man take longer to step inside than his boots ever could. Most nights, he curled up in the old shed, Flint curled beside him. And sometimes, before sleep, he'd take out a small stone from his coat pocket, just to look at it. The one from the river, the one Nally once held to her throat before the water could take her. He hadn't meant to keep it, but somehow, he couldn't let it go. Not until the river thawed. It was early spring, the kind that still held winter in its teeth. He stood by the same bank where he'd found her. The willows still black, still brittle. The air smelled of wet bark and forgiveness. He opened his hand. The stone lay there, dull and weathered, flat on one side, touched faint with memory. He said nothing, didn't need to. He let it fall. It disappeared beneath the water. like it had never been held by pain or mercy. And then he heard it. Boots, soft on the damp earth. She came to stand beside him, said nothing. Nallie's braid was tucked beneath a fox fur collar. Her coat, the same patched one, had been relined by village hands. A quiet thank you in every hidden seam. He didn't turn, but he reached into his coat, held something out. She took it. No questions. The stone, smoothed now, edges worn by time. And his hands, she looked at it. And then she tossed it into the river, like it meant everything or nothing. He looked at her. She looked back, and her hand found his, not clinging, not seeking, just holding, the way you hold a choice. That night, she mended the last curtain in the lodge, not because someone asked, because she could. She set a clean pot on the fire, swept the porch, stitched the name Mary into the hem of a blue wool dress that had once belonged to someone else, not to erase the memory, to carry it. Jed saw it, didn't speak of it. He just folded the gloves she left near the fire, and this time left his boots by the door. The silence between them had changed again. It no longer guarded something broken. It protected something growing. Part 5. The bird that carried memory. He never asked to stay, and they never told him to leave. That was enough. Life in the Shoshone village found its rhythm again. But it wasn't the same song as before. The fire had left scars in the soil. Yes, but so had new tracks. Barefoot, curious, unafraid. Jed Whitlo never moved into the main lodge. He slept in the shed, still, not out of shame, not anymore, but out of something quieter. Respect, because healing, like snowmelt, takes time to soak into the roots. He worked without asking, fixed fences, mended roofs, chopped firewood with a shoulder that burned when the wind turned cold. Pain was no longer punishment. It was proof he was still here. And some days, that was enough. Nally passed him often, sometimes with a child in her arms, sometimes with a hum on her lips, too soft to name. She still didn't say much, but she didn't hide anymore either. Her eyes met his now, not in fear, in recognition, steady, seen. One evening, just as the sun tucked itself behind the ridge, and the world turned that soft lavender gray, a boy, no older than 16, approached Jed. Quiet. He crouched low, didn't speak, just placed something in the dirt between them. Jed looked down. His old cavalry badge, but it wasn't what it had been. It had been melted down, reshaped by fire and patient hands. Now, it was a bird, mid-flight, wings open wide, no army's mark, no uniform's claim, just motion, just witness. Jed picked it up. It was warm, heavier than it looked. His fingers trembled, but he didn't let go. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt something lift. That night, he sat by the riverbank again. Same bend, same trees, but he wasn't the same man. He ran his thumb along the curve of the bird's wing, watching moonlight dance in the grooves. Some part of him already knew. This wasn't an ending, not death, not even closure, just peace behind him. The door creaked. Nally stepped into the night, her shadow long and quiet in the silver glow. She came to sit beside him, a worn satchel in hand. No questions, no need. She knelt, began gathering small stones, formed a ring between them carefully, like prayer. Then, with a steadiness born of survival, she placed the bird at its center, looked at it long, then reached for a smooth, flat stone, set it on top, pressed it down, not to bury it in silence, to plant it like a seed. She turned to him, eyes soft, voice barely above the river's hush, and for the first time, she said his name, Jed. He didn't answer with words. He simply reached over and let his fingers touched the edge of the stone, then stood, and together they walked back into the trees, not holding hands. They didn't need to, because something was already carried between them, a truth not written in law or blood or fire, a quiet vow to stay, to protect, to let go, and begin. The river doesn't forget. Final reflections. By the time the river ran clear again, the world hadn't changed, not in the ways most folks would notice, but something in Jed Whitlo had shifted, and something in Nally had softened. He didn't save her. She didn't heal him. They simply stood beside each other long enough for the pain to quiet, and somehow that was enough. These days, Jed wakes before the sun, chops wood in silence, leaves his gloves folded near the fire before stepping out into the morning. And sometimes when the air is still and the smoke rises straight and clean, he'll see her kneel by the stone they buried together, the one shaped like a bird in flight. She doesn't speak, neither does he, but when their eyes meet, there is no debt, no fear, no past hanging in the space between, only presence, only the now, because some stories aren't about falling in love. They're about choosing to stay when walking away would have been easier. Tell us, what did this story stir in you? Leave a comment below and rate it from 0 to 10. And if you want more quiet stories like this one, go ahead and subscribe, ring that bell, and come back the next time the fire's lit. And if you've ever chosen silence over revenge, type, "I understand, Jed." The land doesn't forget. And sometimes that's a mercy, because what we bury, we can return to. What we witness, we can carry, and what we carry, if we're gentle with it, can one day take flight. If this story touched something in you, the next one goes even deeper. We'll see you by the fire. Until then, take care of each other and listen close, because somewhere out there, the river is still remembering